The next topic we're going to address is biodiversity and its preservation. Once again, I asked Antje Boetius, being from a marine and polar research background, to say a few words about this. And as soon as we have things arranged, we will hear from her on biodiversity, and then we will go into a panel discussion. But I shall just wait for these to be put out, and we can just digest what Dan said for a minute.
Species at a pace that is not known to the history of Earth, to the evolution of life. It is amazing to think that we are living in times where every 8 species on Earth, be it plants or be it animals, is already endangered. In fact, trees are the most vulnerable beings. Every 6 tree species is already endangered today. One thing that not so many people understand is that of all the factors that the climate crisis causes, it's the ocean's life first that is impacted. You can see it from space, as some friends of mine who are astronauts are saying it. You can see that the coral reefs are bleaching across the globe. What is bleaching? It means that the symbionts of the corals is leaving them, and the corals will die off, and then all the fish that seek protection in coral reefs go away. The sharks will have no food, the people will have no income because the tourists stay away, the fisheries won't work. So to understand it, just this one example of an ocean biome, the coral reefs, already connects to maybe a third of all ocean species and connects to humans' lives, give you one factor that is critical. And we can speak of really hundreds and thousands of such factors where critical ocean biomes are fading away. Now, it is a saying that it is so hard to give the right protection to all life on Earth because we don't have one common goal in the climate change problem, but there is one. It is called 30 by 30, and it refers to 30% of Earth's surface to be protected by 2030. It doesn't mean we draw a fence and exclude humans from nature. It actually means that we learn our old traditional knowledge of how to nurture nature so that we have a good future. The figure today is unfortunately only some 20% for land and 10% for the ocean. There is a chance if there is funds made available and a rapid agreement. It's actually not a technology problem, it's a socioeconomic problem where if we decide to spend money on creating jobs of protecting environments, then it is entirely possible.
So now I am delighted to welcome our panel. Hide Sakaguchi, who is president of the Ocean Policy Research Institute, please. Dan Shechtman. Poor Dan, he walked off stage and thought he was done for a bit, but we dragged him back on again, poor him. Cheryl Amnes, who is kindly acting as our moderator today from Tohoku University, please take a seat. And joining us online from London is Tim Hunt, 2001 Nobel Laureate in Medicine. Please, Cheryl, it's your panel.
Thank you, Adam, for that very nice introduction. And I am indeed a professor an associate professor at Tohoku University in the Faculty of Agriculture. And I'm also with the Future Global Leadership Program, where we offer a 4-year degree in English to international students focusing on STEM subjects. And my work, I'm a marine biologist, an applied marine biologist, and my work has largely focused on developing ways to monitor biodiversity in this rapidly changing global climate. And so we use a technology called environmental DNA, where you can take a liter of water from any aquatic environment. You can also do it from the air and soils and things like that, but mine is really aquatic and really marine focused. And just in that liter of water, you can extract the DNA of every single organism that has been in that environment in the recent past, and it depends on the organism how long that is. And so it's really probably among you here, all of you scientists, you probably think, wow, what a great tool, what a great use of DNA and technology and our understanding and our need to monitor biodiversity. Of course, you all may be thinking that. That's great. We can see what's in the community, but we are the minority. Most of the people who would hear that would say, so what? So what? Biodiversity. Okay, well, if I'm not near that environment, what does that really matter to me? And we're going to get the ball rolling because we've heard from Dr. Boitas a rather depressing situation about potentially 1 in 8 species is endangered. And why does that matter? What, what is the importance of that? And Tim, Dr. Hunt, I'm not sure, can you hear me?
I can hear you beautifully. Can you hear me?
Great. So I'd like you to start by
Fantastic.
telling me, so what? Why does biodiversity matter? Oh, telling everyone, actually.
Yeah, does it really matter? One of my dreams is to be able to see a speeded up time-lapse movie of the history of the Earth, going back 4.5 billion years when it first formed. And of course, for the first 2.5, you really won't see much. There'll be no dinosaurs, no monkeys, no trees, no nothing, just microorganisms in the ocean. And then some clever microorganism worked out how to get energy from sunlight and evolve oxygen. And at that point, nothing very much happened except all the iron in the ocean precipitated out and gave all the iron ore that we now see today. And it wasn't for much, much longer. Multicellular organisms like us have really only been around for the past billion years or less. I'm afraid I'm no geologist. I just would love to be able to see this for myself. And during the history of life, what tends to happen, it seems, is that there are long periods of stasis punctuated by catastrophes during which time biodiversity is lost. I mean, the famous one is the huge asteroid that landed on Mexico and wiped out the dinosaurs and wiped out most of the vegetation that was around at the time. And thanks to that elimination of what was there already, the mammals were allowed to spring up and become the dominant feature. And where the problem is now that we humans are so dominant that we're almost doing the work that an asteroid had to do all those hundreds of thousands, hundreds of million years ago. So from a human point of view, of course it matters that the biodiversity is important because we rely on it for all kinds of things. And we tend to forget too that there is tremendous diversity in not only the animals that we see in nature programs on television, but also the animals that lie within us, the microbiome and the microorganisms that live in the sea, which are still not terribly well understood. And there's an awful lot of the oceans which lie essentially unexplored because they're extremely inhospitable to human exploration, being very, very deep and very, very cold and so on and so forth. I don't think we have a very good understanding of the contribution of those organisms to life on Earth. And we don't also, of course, have a very good understanding of what human activity is doing to those organisms. So I'm pretty agnostic on the subject of biodiversity. On the one hand, from a human point of view, it matters extremely, I think. On the other hand, from a biological long-term perspective, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing if we were all wiped out, because something would undoubtedly come to take our place.
Very
Thank you.
interesting perspective. Yes, thank you. So I gather then, yeah, what we call a biodiverse planet is really less than 10% of what was around before these disasters and even ice ages. And so I think geologists have the tendency to say, well, asteroids happen, and now in the Anthropocene we say, well, humans happen. And so we're equivalent to one of these major disasters. The difference is rate, right? And we are doing it at not an instantaneous thing, but a very slow pace for human life, but very quick when you look at the geological scale. And so I had the privilege of, before becoming associate professor at Tohoku University, of working at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. with NOAA scientists and exploring the deep sea in the Gulf of Mexico and making some basically explorations of the very little that we know about the deep sea. And big oil companies are tasked with hiring, subcontracting out researchers to do exploration so that they can then gain the access to drill or mine. And so I had the pleasure of seeing all kinds of biodiversity, even 2 kilometers depths at these underwater biogenic habitats like deep sea corals. Dr. Boyd just talked about coral bleaching, and those are obviously in the shallow waters, the tropical areas of the world, but there are corals that have completely different physiology in the deep. And we're only just beginning to understand those things. And as Dr. Hunt mentioned, those microbes and those environments which humans can normally not go to. And so I'd like to ask Dr. Sakaguchi to talk a little bit about technologies and advancements and things that have allowed us to make an assessment of biodiversity in the deep.
Okay, thank you very much, Cheryl. Well, before getting into the biodiversity and technology for the deep sea, I would like to thank a great Swedish man, Alfred Nobel, who developed dynamite. The reason I thank him is I have a heart disease, cardiovascular, and nitrogen glycerin sometimes cure my heart attack and also some typical symptom. But I think you may know the reason how the doctor find out the relationship between cardiovascular disease and the nitrogen glycerin is one local doctor in Sweden found out the correlation in between the local people who deal with mining engineering, specifically the mining engineering who is on the site, mining site, and they use the nitrogen glycerin. It's a very small amount. I always have this in this pocket as a salt and pepper at the camp, mining camp. Actually, it tastes salt and pepper, and then they frequently use this nitrogen glycerin as a part of a dynamite content. But the doctor found out those who use nitrogen glycerin have less possibility to have a heart attack compared with other general people. And then what was important is he made this hypothesis, the relationship in between nitrogen glycerin soothes heart attack or prevent heart attack, and then examine, and now it's a pill of nitrogen glycerin, save a life a lot. And this, hypothesis and also execution is very, very, important. I will tell it later on this topic. But now getting back into the deep sea biodiversity issues. Deep sea is lots of multiple definition. For example, for the diver, where they cannot approach, that is deep sea. But for fish or shark or whale, what is deep sea? But anyway, deep sea is a deep sea, right? And there is no sunlight and extraordinary hydraulic pressure, and also less possibility to have good food. So these very extraordinary environment is a typical feature of deep sea. And then what the deep sea species are doing, they have adapted and they have developed their own, the metabolism. For example, typical example at the deep sea, the hydrothermal vent exists, and then it brings lots of chemicals and also metals together in a liquid. And then microorganisms use even hydrogen sulfide to have their energy. And then eventually, at deep sea bottom, lots of biodiversity exists to adapt themselves to live. But however, since it's very difficult to approach, and not enough scientific test or sampling have done yet, and that's why we should preserve and keep it. At least we can get to know enough about what's going on and what kind of biodiversity exists at the deep sea environment. And I'm going to touch with the technological development.
Yeah.
To
Yeah. Why don't we wait to go into that, because I think that's a topic all on its own, and I think it's going to be really interesting
Yes.
as a standalone. And so what I'm taking away from what Dr. Sakaguchi is saying is that adaptation is key, and clearly these deep sea organisms live in a world unlike ours. It's dark, it's cold, they're eating, hydrogen sulfide. They're using energy that we don't think about on a regular basis. And so adaptation is really important. And so on long scales, you can acclimatize. We can put on a winter coat when it's cold, or take it off when it's warm, and then we can adapt over several generations, and then things, over millions of years can then evolve. But we're looking on right now at rapidly changing oceans, rapidly changing atmosphere, and the CO2 output is humongous. Right now, highest it's been in maybe 5 million years. And so that is drastically affecting everything around us. And where can these, we've established that biodiversity matters, right? And where can these organisms go if this continues at this pace? And, I talked a little bit about my work on environmental DNA, and that can also be used to study organisms that are introduced to an environment before they get too happy in this new environment and take over. So if you can early detect that, and we're rapidly adapting this kit so it's portable, you can go into environments into countries that don't have a lot of access to electricity using battery operated, and as we heard in earlier discussion, maybe those batteries can be operated by something other than lithium, in the near future. But so you can detect things that are disappearing as well. I work with the Fukushima Aquarium because that area of Tohoku region was inundated during the tsunami in 2011. Many endemic fish species have not been seen since. So we're working together with Tohoku University professors and the aquarium to try to detect them using the environmental DNA technology. But these are little fish. They're endemic, so it's important. But they're not big, tasty fish like groupers or lobsters. And so what do you do, when something is not that tasty or that attractive, or people don't really care if it goes extinct, right? And can you go sort of back to the future and recover things that have been gone? And I'd like to ask Dr. Shechtman to think about that. And what's the connection that biodiversity and all life has? And is there the idea of bringing back some biodiversity?
Okay, I'm not sure that the idea of Professor Tim Han's son will ever be available to us simply because we don't have the DNA of the dinosaurs. And it's very difficult to find viable DNA in creatures that perished 165 million years ago. That is very difficult. However, in our recent times, we have destroyed enough animals that we can bring back because we have their DNA. The woolly mammoth is one example. The dodo, slow bird is another example. We have their DNAs, and I believe that in your lifetime you will see these animals coming back to us and possibly reproduce, which is not a simple mission, and it can be done. So maybe not dinosaurs, Tim, but yes, recently destroyed animals.
Right.
We have the tools to do it now. The CRISPR technology and other inventions that got the Nobel Prize enable us to do that now. This is subject number one. Preserving biodiversity, usually people think about what happened on land, but let's talk about what happened in the sea. In the sea, we also have fantastic biodiversity, and it has been with us for hundreds of millions of years, and we are very rapidly destroying part of it. You know, 12,000 years ago, mankind made a transformation from hunters and gatherers to starting agriculture. Instead of chasing the sheep and killing them, we raised sheep. Instead of collecting fruits and vegetables in the forest, we started agriculture to grow vegetables and fruit. So we are modern people now. We don't chase the sheep, and we do grow our crops. On land, this is agriculture. What happens in the sea is totally different. We are still gatherers and hunters at the sea. 12,000 years later, we're still hunters and gatherers at sea. And we should, and we do start aquaculture. Aquaculture means leave everything that lives in the sea alone. Whatever you need to grow, grow yourself. In cages, in other means, and this started to be a viable project in several countries. Norway is a leader, but in many other countries you see people raise fish and other things in cages. The last thing that I want to talk about is nori. Nori is an algae. In Japan, everybody uses nori every day. And this is an algae, it's a seaweed that is being used here. The market for nori in Japan, I don't know if you know it, is worth $2 billion a year. You eat $2 billion a year of nori. These little thin pieces, $2 billion of nori a year. Right now, we collect them. Why don't you start here in Japan growing nori, growing the seaweed, growing the algae that will give you? So this is aquaculture. And I want to add one last thing. Algae are extremely important for the environment. Algae can grow 0.5 meter a day and rise to tens of meters high. These are huge trees. And in order to build these algae, they use carbon. Where do they take the carbon from? From the seawater, from the CO2, carbon dioxide in the water. They clean the water from carbon dioxide. Where does the water get the carbon dioxide? From the air. So as soon as you deplete the carbon dioxide from the water, the air gives the carbon dioxide to the water to create a chemical balance. And so the importance of seaweed to the environment is equal to the importance of the Amazon forest to the same environment, and it's doing the same way. While the Amazon takes the CO2 from the air, the algae or the seaweed takes the CO2 from the water, and the effect is the same. and it's wonderful. And we should cultivate seaweed. We should make sure that seaweed is very well treated and no creatures destroy it. We should cultivate it. Aquaculture.
Thank you. Yes, aquaculture, extremely important in the Waters Matters dialogue. So currently, the UN Commission on Fisheries and Agriculture has estimated that aquaculture now exceeds fishing on the globe. So it's more than 50% of the fisheries, the commercial fishery products that we eat globally come from aquaculture. And these are great things, preserving biodiversity, because I work a lot with aquariums. I work with the aquariums, a lot of them in Tohoku, as well as Kanto and Kagoshima. And they are hotspots of biodiversity because they are rearing these animals that, should they go extinct, they are figuring out the life cycle. And octopus is something that is very prized in Japan, and especially in the Tohoku region where I live. And I've been working with the octopus fisheries in Saskawa, which was completely inundated and devastated in 2011. And since then, they have seen a sharp decline in certain species of octopus. So we're working with them to adapt our technology so we can try to see where the octopus are and why they're not coming back in great abundance. But octopus, only one place in the world, in Spain, and this was last year, has successfully conducted aquaculture on octopus. And so Japan is working very hard on that, but I think we need a push for aquaculture and at the same time start from the beginning, making sure the proper practices are used to not make more damage to the environment. And so working with indigenous knowledge is really important. And I wonder if Dr. Hunt, can you talk a little bit about how working with knowledge of a local or a regional area, or even a national area, can help us to solve problems that might not seem really apparent. We're short on time, so maybe like a minute or two. It's a big topic, but if you could address it, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to take up with Dan Shechtman, who a good friend of mine. To point out that actually when just came back from living in Okinawa, and right on our doorstep were 2 kinds of seaweed farms. So it's being done. It's been done for a long time, I think, in Japan. So that's good. But my favorite of all actually would be mollusks, snails, because of course there the CO2 gets fixed into something which is extremely stable, insoluble calcium carbonate. And nobody seems to have suggested that we should have sort of snail farms in order to solve the decarbonization program. And I'm not quite sure why that is, but it seems to me a very sensible thing. And you look at all those mountains or the white cliffs of Dover, and of course the amount of CO2 that's tied up in the Dolomites, for example, is extraordinary. I guess at that time the situation there probably wasn't very biodiverse. It was a bit of a monoculture to get those huge mountains. But again, I have no sense of geological time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's I like the follow-up because it's on land. We're still in a safe situation where we can have all of this calcium carbonate. In the ocean, with ocean acidification, things that normally, corals and calcifiers, all those delicious oysters that you like on your plate, or even sea urchins, right? Their bodies have aragonite, which is a form of calcium carbonate, and that is dwindling because of the amount of CO2 in the air. But I would like to finish with asking Sakaguchi-san if you could talk about some of those technologies that have been developed for deep sea exploration, but also some computer modeling and things. It's a short amount of time, but I think we'd really like to hear that.
These days, human-operated submarine and also unmanned submarine can approach to the deep sea, and also drilling ship can approach to the deep sea, and then they start a kind of deep sea mining these days. But keep it in mind for everyone is, as I mentioned, deep sea is a treasure box of biodiversity, and they have the environmental approach to preserve, but it's still not enough because people still don't know what's going on there, and if we don't know how we can preserve, how we can observe, right? So we should rely on technological and scientific development, but at the same time we should keep in mind we still don't know about the deep sea a lot. More than 90% we don't know. So for example, upwelling from deep sea brings a lot of nutrients to the surface, and then biological activity is very hot at the seamount, using the oceanic circulation, bringing a lot of nutrient from the bottom. But what my friend Dougal Lindsay, who is my colleague at my previous work, he taught me biological activity doesn't fit with biodiversity. That means, but it's paradoxical, issues.
Right.
Low biological activity brings larger biodiversity. So what I can say is a quiet area should be quiet. Don't make big noise, for the quiet area. That is very, suggestive information.
That's very good.
He
Yeah,
gave me.
that's very
Yes.
good advice. So I think we are over time, and I'd like to wrap up and just say thank you. I think we can take away with using the knowledge that's already out there and sharing it. And then if we don't know, right, how can we do anything? So actively educating people and ourselves on biodiversity and water matters. Thank you so much.